"You're not her first husband, sir." The little girl's voice was quiet, but it stopped the entire room. Alessandro Vieri had heard threats from powerful men, lies from trusted partners, and promises from people who wanted something from him. But he had never heard a sentence that made a room full of wealthy people forget how to breathe. The crystal glass in his hand slipped before he even realized his fingers had loosened. It hit the marble floor of the Vieri mansion dining room and shattered into pieces of red wine and silence. Across the long table, Isabella Moretti remained perfectly still. The woman everyone had come to admire that evening, the woman wearing an elegant black dress and the diamond ring Alessandro had placed on her hand, did not look angry. She did not look surprised. She looked afraid, and Alessandro noticed. For a man who had spent decades reading people, that single expression was louder than any confession. The dinner had been planned as a celebration, the kind of night that appeared in magazines and society pages. Silver plates, expensive candles, a table long enough to separate strangers from family, and guests who understood that every word mattered. Tomorrow, Alessandro and Isabella would announce their wedding date. Everyone in the room believed they were witnessing the beginning of a perfect future. Everyone except Maya Johnson. The 9-year-old girl stood near the service entrance beside her mother, Elena, who worked in the Vieri household. Maya was not supposed to be part of the conversation. She knew that. Children like her were expected to carry empty plates away, stay quiet, and disappear before important people noticed them. But Maya had noticed something. Something small. Something everyone else had ignored. Her eyes moved toward Isabella's hand. Not the diamond engagement ring. The other ring. The thin silver band partly hidden beneath her sleeve. Alessandro slowly looked at it. "What did you say?" he asked. His voice was calm, but the room knew calm was sometimes more dangerous than anger. Maya swallowed. She looked at her mother first. Elena's face had gone pale, not because she was angry at her daughter, but because she understood what happened when someone without power challenged someone with it. "I said," Maya whispered, "you should know before you marry her." Isabella finally spoke. Her voice was gentle, almost too gentle. "Alessandro, she is a child. She probably misunderstood something she saw." The words sounded reasonable. That was what made them effective. No shouting, no panic. Just a simple explanation that asked everyone to move on. But Alessandro did not look away from Maya. He had built his entire world around one rule. Details mattered. People could control their words. They could prepare stories. They could practice expressions. But small details were harder to control. Maya slowly reached into her small backpack and pulled out a worn notebook. The cover was faded. The corners were bent from years of use. She opened it carefully. Inside were drawings made with colored pencils. A flower, her mother's kitchen, the mansion garden, and a small silver ring. "I draw things I don't understand," Maya said, "because sometimes people say something is not important when it is." Alessandro looked at the drawing. Then he looked at Isabella. For the first time that evening, the perfect image surrounding his future wife had a crack in it. Tiny crack, but enough for doubt to enter. "Who is he?" Alessandro asked quietly. Isabella's expression changed for less than a second. A moment so small most people would have missed it, but Maya did not, and neither did Alessandro. The room remained silent as everyone waited for an answer. The powerful people at the table had questions. The lawyers had explanations ready. Isabella had a story prepared. But a little girl with a worn notebook had just placed the first piece of a truth nobody wanted uncovered. And Alessandro Vieri had one question that suddenly mattered more than the wedding itself. Who was the man Maya had seen in the past that Isabella had worked so hard to erase? For several seconds after Alessandro asked the question, nobody at the table moved. The candles continued to burn. The expensive watches continued to count the seconds. But the atmosphere inside the Vieri mansion had changed. The celebration was gone. In its place was a question that no one wanted to answer. Who was the man Maya had seen? Isabella gently placed her glass down and looked toward Alessandro with a calm expression. I think we should not let a misunderstanding from a child ruin this evening, she said. Her voice was warm. Her words sounded reasonable. That was exactly why they worked so well. She was not fighting. She was controlling the room. Around the table, several guests nodded quietly. They were used to listening to people with status, people who wore expensive clothes and spoke with confidence. Maya was only 9 years old. She was the daughter of the woman who served their meals. In a room filled with powerful adults, her voice seemed small. But Alessandro noticed something that bothered him. Isabella did not ask Maya what she saw. She did not say, "What man are you talking about?" She did not look confused. She looked concerned about what Maya might reveal. Alessandro leaned back in his chair and studied everyone carefully. "Maya," he said, "tell me exactly what you saw." Elena immediately stepped forward. "Mr. Vieri, I am sorry. She should not have interrupted dinner." Her voice carried the fear of someone who knew how quickly a mistake could cost everything. Maya looked at her mother, then back at Alessandro. "I do not want my mother to lose her job," she said quietly. That sentence changed something in the room. Alessandro looked at Elena. Then he looked back at Maya. The child was not trying to gain attention. She was not asking for anything. She was worried about the consequences for someone else. "Your mother is not the subject right now," Alessandro said. "You are." Maya lowered her eyes and opened the small notebook she carried. The pages were filled with simple drawings. Nothing professional. Nothing that looked like evidence. Just a child's way of remembering things. She turned to a page with a silver ring drawn in colored pencil. Beside it was a name. Luca. Isabella immediately stood up. "That is enough." The words came out faster than before. The room went quiet again. Alessandro slowly turned his head toward her. "Enough of what?" he asked. Isabella paused. She recovered quickly. "Enough of involving a child in adult matters." Alessandro looked at the notebook once more. "You are right about one thing. She is a child." He closed the notebook gently. "Which means she is unlikely to have created a complicated story for personal gain." No one answered. Isabella's brother, Marco, finally spoke. "Alessandro, you know how children are. They hear names. They mix memories together." It was a simple explanation. A normal explanation. But Alessandro had spent years learning that normal explanations were often used when people wanted to avoid unusual questions. "Maybe," he said, "but I want to understand why this particular name made everyone uncomfortable." The room became colder. Not because anyone raised their voice. Because everyone realized Alessandro was no longer defending his engagement. He was investigating it. Maya carefully pointed at the drawing. "I saw her holding this ring in the upstairs room," she said. "She was looking at it and crying. Then she put it away when someone came in." Elena looked at her daughter in surprise. She had never heard this before. Alessandro looked toward Isabella. "Is that true?" Isabella answered immediately. "No." Too quickly. Alessandro noticed. He noticed everything. He noticed the way her fingers touched the engagement ring. He noticed the way Marco avoided eye contact. He noticed how the lawyer at the table became very still. One small statement from a child had created 3 new questions. If the ring meant nothing, why hide it? If Luca meant nothing, why did everyone recognize the name? And if Maya was mistaken, why did the adults look afraid of what she remembered? Alessandro stood up slowly. The dinner was over. Not officially. Not with an announcement. But everyone understood. The night meant for celebrating a wedding had become the beginning of something else. As Maya and Elena walked away, Alessandro looked once more at the little notebook in his hand. The drawing was simple. The truth behind it was not. And for the first time, Alessandro wondered if the person he was about to marry had spent years carefully choosing what he was allowed to know. But one question remained unanswered. Where had Maya seen the ring? And what else had Isabella hidden inside that house? The next morning, the Vieri mansion felt different. The same marble floors reflected the same golden lights. The same employees moved quietly through the halls. The same security team stood outside the gates. But Alessandro Vieri noticed something that no one else seemed to notice. The house was still the same. The people inside it were not. Since the dinner ended, he had replayed every moment in his mind. Not Maya's accusation, not even the name Luca. What stayed with him was Isabella's reaction. A person who had nothing to hide usually wanted answers. A person who felt misunderstood usually wanted to explain. But Isabella had wanted one thing. She wanted Maya to stop talking. Alessandro sat alone in his private office, looking at the small notebook Maya had left behind. He did not open it again immediately. He knew better than to let emotion guide his decisions. In his world, assumptions created mistakes. Facts created choices. He needed facts. A few minutes later, he found Maya in the kitchen with her mother. The little girl was helping Elena organize breakfast trays. When she saw Alessandro enter, she immediately stood straight. Not because she was afraid of him, because she understood that powerful people expected certain behavior. "Maya," Alessandro said, "I want to ask you a few questions." Elena looked nervous. "Mr. Vieri, if she caused trouble." Alessandro raised his hand gently. "This is not about punishment." He looked at Maya. "It is about understanding." Maya nodded. Alessandro placed the notebook on the table. "Tell me about the drawing." Maya sat down carefully. She did not rush. She did not exaggerate. She simply remembered. "I saw the ring when I was bringing clean towels upstairs," she said. "The door was open a little. I was not trying to look. I just saw it." Alessandro listened. "What happened next?" Maya touched the edge of the notebook. She was holding the ring and looking at an old picture. Then she heard someone coming and put everything away. "What picture?" Maya shook her head. "I do not know. I only saw part of it." That answer interested Alessandro more than a dramatic story would have. Maya admitted what she did not know. She did not fill the empty spaces with guesses. "Why did you write Luca in your notebook?" he asked. Maya looked down. "Because I heard her say that name." Alessandro leaned forward slightly. "When?" "A few weeks ago." "What exactly did you hear?" Maya thought carefully. She said, "I thought that part of my life was finished." The room became quiet. Alessandro did not react immediately. He had learned that silence often revealed more than pressure. "Did anyone else hear this?" he asked. Maya looked toward her mother. Elena looked away. That small movement told Alessandro something. Elena knew more than she had admitted, but she was afraid to say it. Alessandro noticed. He did not push her yet. Instead, he turned back to Maya. "Why did you decide to tell me now?" Maya answered honestly. "Because tomorrow you were going to promise forever to someone, and I thought you should know everything before you did." The simplicity of the answer stayed with him. She was not trying to expose Isabella. She was not trying to become important. She believed telling the truth before a major decision was the right thing to do. Alessandro closed the notebook. "Thank you for telling me." After Maya left with her mother, Alessandro remained in the kitchen for several minutes. He looked at the doorway where the little girl had disappeared. Then he looked at the notebook again. A child had given him a question, but the adults around him had given him reasons to investigate. Later that afternoon, Alessandro quietly reviewed Isabella's personal information. Her education records were clear. Her business history was clear. Her public image was clear. Almost too clear. There was one strange gap. A period of 18 months that had no explanation. No location. No employment record. No public information. For anyone else, it might have been a simple privacy choice. But Alessandro had built an empire by noticing unusual patterns. Then his assistant placed a file on his desk. "There is something else," the assistant said. This name appeared in an old property record connected to Isabella. Alessandro opened the file. I stopped on one line. Luca Moretti. The same name Maya had written in a child's notebook. The same name Isabella had never mentioned. Alessandro leaned back slowly. For the first time, the question was no longer whether Maya had seen something strange. The question was why so many adults had worked so hard to make sure nobody else saw it. And somewhere inside the mansion, Isabella Moretti still believed the little girl's memory was the weakest part of the story. She was about to discover that it was the one thing nobody could erase. Alessandro Vieri did not confront Isabella after discovering the name Luca Moretti. That was the mistake many people made when they learned something painful. They reacted before they understood. Alessandro had survived long enough to know that the first person who panicked was often the person who had something to protect. So instead of asking Isabella for answers, he decided to ask questions she did not expect. The next morning, he joined Isabella for coffee in the garden behind the mansion. The sunlight was bright, the flowers were carefully arranged, and everything looked peaceful. Isabella smiled as she handed him his cup. "You seem distracted today," she said. Alessandro looked at her calmly. "I was reviewing some old information." Her expression stayed relaxed. "About what?" Alessandro took a slow sip of coffee. "About Chicago, the year 2014. For the smallest moment, Isabella stopped moving. It was barely noticeable. A pause, a breath, a tiny change in her eyes. But Alessandro noticed. "Why Chicago?" she asked. Alessandro placed the cup down. "Interesting. I did not say there was anything unusual about Chicago." Isabella quickly smiled. "I just assumed you meant something related to business." Alessandro did not answer. The conversation continued, but something had changed. Isabella was still polite, still elegant, still composed. But now Alessandro was watching the spaces between her words. Later that day, he asked his assistant to review public records connected to Isabella. Nothing illegal, nothing invasive, just information that should have existed if her story was complete. The results came back with more questions than answers. Isabella Moretti had a carefully organized public history, school records, charity events, business connections, social appearances. But there was a strange gap between the years 2013 and 2015. 18 months where almost nothing existed. No clear address, no employment record, no public information. For most people, that might have meant nothing. But Alessandro did not build his reputation by ignoring unusual details. Meanwhile, Maya noticed something else. She was walking through the hallway carrying folded towels when she saw Isabella speaking quietly with her brother Marco. Maya did not stop to listen. She knew better. She simply noticed something that felt wrong. Isabella was holding the same old silver ring. When Marco asked her something, she immediately hid it inside her hand. Maya continued walking and later wrote a small note in her notebook. Not because she wanted to investigate, because she had learned that forgotten details sometimes mattered. That evening, Alessandro asked Maya one more question. "When you saw the ring, did you see anything else?" Maya thought carefully. "A picture." "What kind of picture?" "An old one." There was a man standing beside her. Alessandro looked at her notebook. "Can you draw what you remember?" Maya picked up her pencil. She did not create a perfect portrait. She only drew what she knew. A man. Isabella. The ring. A small house behind them. Alessandro studied the drawing. Then he noticed something. In the corner of the picture, Maya had drawn a small symbol. "What is this?" he asked. Maya looked at it. "I do not know. I saw it on the back of the picture." Alessandro immediately called his assistant. Within an hour, a new detail appeared. The symbol belonged to a private legal office that had handled old family agreements years earlier. The same office that had worked with Victor Moretti, Isabella's current lawyer. Alessandro looked at the information on his screen and felt the situation changing. This was no longer just about a hidden marriage. Too many connections were appearing. Too many people were connected to the same missing piece of history. That night, Alessandro walked through the mansion. Alone. He passed the dining room where Maya's words had first stopped him. He passed the hallway where she had seen the ring. A child had noticed a detail. The adults had ignored it. But now the detail was becoming a pattern. Alessandro picked up his phone and called his private investigator. "I want everything connected to Luca Moretti," he said. "Not rumors, not guesses, documents." As the call ended, His phone received one more message. A single image from an old archive. It showed a record that should not have existed. A marriage certificate. A name he recognized. And a date years before Isabella ever met him. Alessandro stared at the screen in silence. The question was no longer whether Isabella had a past. Everyone had a past. The question was why she had built an entire new identity around pretending that one part of hers had never existed. And for the first time, Isabella Moretti realized something was changing. Alessandro was no longer trying to understand Maya's story. He was starting to uncover her own. The old marriage certificate sat on Alessandro Vieri's desk for several minutes before he touched it again. He had seen thousands of documents in his life. Contracts, agreements, financial records, papers that changed the direction of entire companies. But this one felt different. Not because of what it showed. Because of what someone had tried to erase. The name at the top was clear. Isabella Moretti. The date was clear. The signature was clear. And beside her name was another name. Luca Moretti. The same name Maya had written in a child's notebook. Alessandro leaned back in his chair and looked through the glass wall of his office toward the mansion grounds. Everything around him represented control, security, organization, preparation. Yet inside his own home, someone had created a story and carefully decided which parts he was allowed to know. But Alessandro still needed more than a document. One record could be incomplete. One paper could be outdated. He had learned never to build decisions on a single piece of information. The next morning, he asked his assistant to locate the old jewelry box that had been stored with Isabella's personal belongings. When the box arrived, it looked ordinary. A small wooden container with a worn surface. Nothing about it suggested importance. That was exactly why it had survived. Alessandro opened it slowly. Inside were old photographs, a few letters, and at the bottom, covered beneath a piece of fabric, was the silver ring Maya had drawn. He picked it up carefully. The ring was simple. Nothing like the expensive diamond jewelry Isabella wore in public. It looked like something connected to a different version of her life. A life she wanted forgotten. Alessandro called a specialist to examine the engraving. The result came back within hours. The inscription was real. Luca Moretti. Forever. The date matched the marriage certificate. The evidence was no longer just a child's memory. It was a physical object that connected the past to the present. Later that afternoon, Alessandro asked Isabella to meet him in his office. He placed the ring on the desk between them. For the first time since their relationship began, Isabella did not immediately have an answer. She looked at the ring. Then she looked at Alessandro. "Where did you find that?" she asked. Alessandro noticed the question. Not "what is that?" Not "why are you showing me this?" Her first concern was where it came from. "So you recognize it," he said. Isabella remained quiet. Then she slowly sat down. "I was going to tell you." Alessandro looked at her. "When?" That single word carried more weight than anger. Isabella explained that Luca was part of her past. She said the marriage had ended years ago. She said she wanted to leave that chapter behind. To someone else, the explanation might have sounded reasonable. People had histories. People made mistakes. People moved forward. But Alessandro looked at the evidence in front of him. The missing records. The hidden ring. The erased timeline. "Moving forward is not the same as deleting the road behind you," he said. Isabella looked away. Meanwhile, Maya sat in the kitchen with her mother, unaware of the details being uncovered upstairs. Elena noticed her daughter drawing again. "Are you still thinking about that night?" she asked. Maya nodded. "I did not want anyone to get in trouble." Elena looked at her carefully. "Then why did you say something?" Maya held her pencil and answered softly. "Because if someone was making a big choice, they should know the truth before they make it." Elena had no response. Her daughter had not acted out of curiosity. She had acted out of honesty. That evening, Alessandro received another file. This one was not about Isabella's marriage. It was about Luca Moretti's connection to financial agreements connected to the Vieri organization. The first page contained a name that made everything more complicated. Victor Moretti, Isabella's lawyer, her brother, her advisor, the person who had defended her since the first question was asked. Alessandro closed the file slowly. The hidden marriage was real. The missing history was real. But now another question appeared. Had Isabella hidden her past because she was ashamed of it, or because someone had planned for that past to disappear? Alessandro looked toward the hallway where Maya had once stood holding her small notebook. A 9-year-old girl had found the first crack. Now he had to discover how deep it went. And somewhere else in the mansion, Isabella received a message that made her expression change for the first time that day. The message was short. He found the ring. The message on Isabella Moretti's phone was simple. He found the ring. She stared at the words for several seconds before locking the screen. To anyone watching from the outside, she still looked like the same woman everyone admired. Elegant, calm, controlled. But inside the Vieri mansion, the carefully prepared story around her was beginning to fall apart. Alessandro Vieri had spent his entire life learning one important lesson. The truth was rarely hidden in one dramatic moment. It was hidden in patterns. A missing record, a strange reaction, a person who answered a question before it was fully asked. And now those patterns were pointing toward something much larger than a secret marriage. The next morning, Alessandro met with his private investigator in a quiet office away from the main house. He placed every piece of information on the table. The marriage, certificate, the ring analysis, the missing 18 months in Isabella's history, the connection to Victor Moretti. "I need the complete picture," Alessandro said. "Not what people want me to believe. What actually happened." Hours later, the first report arrived. Luca Moretti had not simply been Isabella's former husband. He had been connected to several financial arrangements involving old family assets. More importantly, his name appeared in documents connected to a trust that had once been reviewed by the Vieri organization. Alessandro read the information carefully. The question was no longer whether Isabella had a hidden past. The question was why her hidden past was connected to his world. Meanwhile, Isabella attempted to regain control of the situation. She invited Alessandro to dinner and acted as if the discovery had only created a temporary misunderstanding. "Everyone has things from their past," she said softly. "I was afraid you would judge me." Alessandro looked at her. It was the kind of explanation that could convince many people. It appealed to emotion. It asked for understanding. But Alessandro noticed what was missing. She still had not explained why official records had disappeared. She had not explained why her own brother and lawyer seemed prepared for questions about Luca. "Fear can explain silence," Alessandro said. "It does not explain preparation." Isabella's expression changed slightly. For the first time, she realized Alessandro was not looking for an apology. He was looking for facts. Later that evening, Alessandro visited Elena in the staff area of the mansion. He did not question her like an employer questioning an employee. He spoke to her like someone who understood that fear could make honest people stay quiet. "You knew something about Isabella," he said. Elena looked down. "I only knew that some subjects were not supposed to be discussed." Alessandro waited. Elena finally explained that years earlier, she had seen Isabella receive letters with Luca's name on them. She had also heard Victor tell Isabella that some records needed to be handled carefully. But Elena had stayed silent because she was afraid of losing the only stable job she had for herself and Maya. Alessandro did not blame her. He understood the difference between hiding a lie and surviving inside someone else's power. The next day, a new document arrived. It was a copy of a legal agreement connected to Isabella and Luca. The document showed something important. Isabella's first marriage had never simply disappeared. It had been moved through a series of legal changes that made the history difficult to find. Someone had not erased the past. Someone had buried it under paperwork. Alessandro looked at the signature at the bottom. Victor Moretti, the same lawyer who had defended Isabella from the beginning. The same person who had dismissed Maya's words as a child's misunderstanding. At that moment, Alessandro understood the real danger. Isabella was not alone. She had people helping her maintain the story. That evening, Maya was sitting at the kitchen table drawing again when Alessandro walked in. He placed the notebook in front of her. "You were right about one thing," he said. Maya looked up. The ring mattered. She nodded quietly. "I did not know why." Alessandro gave a small nod. "You did not need to know everything. You only needed to notice what others ignored." For the first time since the dinner, Maya smiled. But Alessandro's expression remained serious, because he now knew the truth was much bigger than a hidden husband. A hidden marriage had opened the door to a carefully built plan. And the next question was the most important one yet. What did Isabella and Victor hope to gain after Alessandro became legally tied to her? Alessandro Vieri had spent years building a reputation around control. He controlled his companies, his alliances, his decisions, and most importantly, the information that entered his world. But now he was facing something different. Someone had not attacked his empire from the outside. Someone had entered his life through trust and carefully shaped what he believed to be true. The wedding plans continued publicly. Invitations were still being discussed. Guests still believed Alessandro and Isabella were preparing for a new chapter together. But behind closed doors, Alessandro had changed. The rules. He was no longer a man preparing for marriage. He was a man collecting the truth. He made one decision that surprised everyone around him. He did not cancel anything. He did not accuse Isabella. He did not reveal what he knew. Instead, he allowed the people involved to believe their plan was still working. If someone spent years building a story, Alessandro told his investigator, they will eventually reveal the ending they prepared. The investigation became more detailed. They reviewed financial records, communication logs, and legal documents connected to the Moretti family. Nothing was taken without proper verification. Every piece had to connect. Every claim needed proof. Then a new discovery appeared. A series of emails between Victor Moretti and an outside legal consultant showed discussions about changing ownership structures after Alessandro and Isabella married. The messages did not directly state a crime, but the timing was impossible to ignore. The conversations began shortly after Isabella entered Alessandro's life. Alessandro read the documents silently. The pattern was becoming clear. Isabella had not simply hidden a previous marriage. She had prepared a future where her position inside the Vieri family would become difficult to challenge. Meanwhile, Isabella continued playing her role. She visited charities. She smiled for cameras. She spoke about family and loyalty. To the public, she looked like the perfect future wife of Alessandro Vieri. But inside the mansion, small mistakes began appearing. One afternoon, Alessandro mentioned Luca casually during lunch. Isabella immediately looked toward Victor before answering. It lasted less than a second, but it confirmed something important. They were not just sharing information. They were sharing fear. Later that evening, Alessandro reviewed the security footage from the mansion. He was not searching for dramatic moments. He was searching for connections. The cameras showed Isabella meeting Victor privately several times over the past month. Their conversations could not be heard clearly, but the timing matched the legal documents. Then another detail appeared. A folder had been moved from Isabella's office to Victor's briefcase shortly after Maya had mentioned the ring. Alessandro watched the footage again. The folder itself was not proof of wrongdoing, but it was a missing piece. Why move documents after a child revealed a secret? While Alessandro continued his investigation, Maya remained unaware of the larger situation. She was still a child trying to understand why telling the truth had created so much tension. One evening, she found Alessandro in the library and asked a simple question. "Are you angry with me?" Alessandro looked surprised. "Why would I be angry with you?" Maya looked down. "Because everyone became upset after I talked." Alessandro walked closer and answered carefully. "People sometimes become upset when the truth arrives before they are ready for it." Maya thought about that. Did I do the right thing? Alessandro paused. He had dealt with many difficult choices in his life, but that question from a child felt heavier than most decisions. "Yes," he said, "because you told the truth without trying to hurt anyone." Maya nodded quietly. For the first time, Alessandro realized something important. The power of her words did not come from having influence. It came from having nothing to gain. Later that night, the final piece of the investigation arrived. A security review discovered that Victor had accessed old Vieri legal archives months before Alessandro announced his engagement to Isabella. The timing changed everything. Someone had been preparing long before the wedding plans became public. Alessandro closed the file and looked out over the city lights. The woman he almost married had not just hidden a chapter of her life. She had built a carefully arranged path toward his future. But now he had something she did not expect. Proof. Not suspicion. Not emotion. Proof. And soon, the people who believed they controlled the story would have to face the one thing they could not manipulate. The truth in front of everyone. The Vieri family meeting had always been a place where decisions were made quietly. No raised voices. No unnecessary arguments. The people who entered that room understood one thing. Facts mattered more than emotions. That was why Isabella Moretti believed she still had a chance. She believed Alessandro would protect his reputation before he questioned the woman standing beside him. She believed the carefully created image she had shown the world was stronger than the truth hidden underneath it. She was wrong. On the morning of the meeting, the Vieri mansion looked exactly as it always did. The same stone entrance. The same security team. The same long hallway leading toward the family conference room. But this time, Alessandro entered carrying something different. Not anger. Not revenge. Evidence. Isabella arrived wearing the same confidence she had shown for months. She greeted everyone politely. She thanked the family members for coming. She spoke about loyalty and the future. To anyone watching from the outside, she looked like the woman who belonged there. Then Alessandro placed a small wooden box on the table. Inside was the silver ring. The room became silent. Isabella's expression changed slightly, but she quickly recovered. "I already explained this," she said. "That was part of my past." Alessandro nodded. "Your past is not the problem." He placed the marriage certificate beside the ring. "The problem is that you made sure nobody could find it." Victor Moretti, her lawyer and brother, immediately responded. "That document does not prove intent. It proves only that Isabella was married before." Alessandro looked at him calmly. "That would be true if we were only discussing a marriage." He placed another file on the table. Then another. Each document connected a different part of the story. The old marriage record. The legal agreements. The financial arrangements. The communication between Victor and outside consultants. The timeline that showed preparations beginning long before the engagement announcement. The room changed with every piece of paper. Isabella was no longer explaining a forgotten chapter. She was answering questions about a carefully managed story. Marco Moretti tried to defend his sister. "You are making assumptions." Alessandro looked at him. "No, I am showing patterns." Then he turned toward the screen at the end of the room. The security footage appeared. It showed Victor entering Isabella's office after Maya had mentioned the ring. It showed documents being moved. It showed conversations happening at times that matched the investigation. The footage did not need dramatic words. The timing spoke for itself. Isabella looked toward Victor. For the first time, the confidence between them disappeared. They had prepared for questions. They had prepared for suspicion. They had not prepared for every detail being connected. Then Alessandro asked Elena and Maya to enter the room. Elena hesitated at the door. She did not feel like she belonged among powerful people. For years, she had walked through that mansion carrying trays, cleaning rooms, and staying invisible. Maya held her mother's hand as they entered. Alessandro stood up. The entire room noticed. "Maya," he said, "come here." The little girl walked forward slowly. She looked at the same table where she had once stood behind the adults. But this time, she was not standing there because she served them. She was standing there because her voice mattered. Alessandro placed the notebook on the table. This was the first clue. Maya looked down. "I did not know what it meant." Alessandro nodded. "You did not need to. You noticed something everyone else ignored. Isabella looked at Maya with frustration. You do not understand what you started. Maya did not answer immediately. She looked at Alessandro instead. He gave her a small nod. Then she spoke quietly. I did not start anything. I just told the truth. Those words affected the room more than any document, because they revealed the difference between power and honesty. Alessandro turned back to the family members. For too long, people believed status determined who deserved to be heard. He looked toward Elena. That ends today. The investigation would continue through legal channels. The evidence would be reviewed properly. No shortcuts. No private punishment. Just accountability. Isabella had built her plan around controlling information. But she had forgotten one thing. The smallest person in the room had already revealed the first piece of truth. And once the truth was seen, it could no longer be hidden. In the days after the Vieri family meeting, the mansion became quieter. Not because people had less to say, but because everyone was learning the weight of what had happened. For years, the house had been filled with rules about reputation, loyalty, and appearances. But now everyone understood something important. Perfect image could be built. Perfect image could be protected. But it could also be broken by one honest voice. The investigation into Isabella Moretti and Victor Moretti continued through the proper legal process. Every document was reviewed. Every agreement was examined. The evidence that Alessandro had collected was not used for revenge. It was used to reveal the truth and protect the people who had been placed at risk. The hidden marriage, the altered records, the financial arrangements, the carefully planned path toward control of Vieri assets. Each piece showed the same pattern. Isabella had not simply kept a secret. She had created a version of herself that depended on everyone else never asking the right questions. In the weeks that followed, the public story changed. The woman who had appeared at charity events and spoken about honesty was now facing serious legal consequences for the decisions made behind closed doors. Victor Moretti lost the trust of the people who had relied on him as a legal advisor. The documents he helped prepare became part of the evidence showing how the plan had developed over time. Marco Moretti had to answer difficult questions about what he knew and when he knew it. But inside the Vieri mansion, another story was happening. Quieter one. A story about a mother and daughter who had spent years trying to remain unnoticed. Elena Johnson stood in the same kitchen where she had worked every day, preparing meals and keeping the household running. For a long time, she believed her place was always behind everyone else. She believed people with power could decide whether she was valued or ignored. Then Alessandro walked into the kitchen one morning and placed a folder on the table. Elena looked at him carefully. What is this? She asked. Alessandro answered calmly. Your new employment agreement. She looked confused. I already work here. Alessandro nodded. Yes, but you should never have been treated like someone who could disappear whenever it was convenient. The new agreement recognized her years of work, provided better security, and gave her a formal position within the household management team. It was not a gift. It was recognition. Elena looked down, trying to hold back her emotions. She had spent years believing she needed to stay silent to protect what little she had. Now she understood that being valued did not require permission from powerful people. Meanwhile, Maya sat in the library with Alessandro. The same little notebook that started everything rested on the table between them. Do you still write down things you notice? Alessandro asked. Maya nodded. Sometimes. She opened the notebook and showed him a new drawing. It was not a ring this time. It was the dining table. But something was different. In the drawing, everyone was sitting together. No one was standing near the wall. No one was invisible. Alessandro studied the picture for a moment. Why did you draw it this way? He asked. Maya looked up. Because everyone should have a place at the table. The answer stayed with him. Alessandro had spent years believing power meant deciding who entered the room. Maya reminded him that sometimes the most important question was who had been left outside. Months later, the silver ring connected to Luca Moretti was placed into the official evidence records. It was no longer a hidden object. No longer a secret someone could control. It became a reminder of the moment when the truth began. Alessandro never forgot that the person who protected him from a carefully planned deception was not a lawyer, not an investigator, and not someone with influence. It was a 9-year-old girl who noticed something small and decided it mattered. One evening, Alessandro passed the dining room where everything had changed. Maya was sitting at the table with Elena. There were no special rules keeping them apart anymore. No one told them where they belonged. Alessandro looked at Maya and smiled. Most people spend their whole lives trying to become powerful. Maya looked at him curiously. "What is power?" she asked. Alessandro thought about the broken glass, the hidden ring, and the truth that changed everything. Then he answered, "Power is having the courage to tell the truth when everyone else wants silence." Maya smiled and returned to her drawing. The mansion was still large. The family was still powerful. But something important had changed forever. The smallest person in the room had reminded everyone that honesty did not need status, money, or influence. Sometimes the person with the least power is the person who sees the most clearly.